Okay, it's been a month since the largest oil supply disruption in history, and Brent crude oil prices are now well over $100 per barrel. Driving your car has already become very, very expensive indeed. But sadly, I'm here to tell you it's going to get quite a bit worse. You see, just as when after the 2022 Ukraine energy crisis, your food bill at the grocery store skyrocketed, this crisis will sadly do the same. Indeed, some fertilizer prices are already up by well over 50%. But because this will only affect harvests in a couple of weeks or months, unlike at the gas pump, you will only start feeling this crisis in your wallet later. So, when can you expect things to get more expensive? What types of food are most at risk? And especially, how bad is this food crisis going to get? Hey, I'm Joeri, I have a PhD in economics, and in today's Money and Macro briefing, I will answer all of these questions. But before getting into that, we first need to quickly review why Hormuz is so crucial for global food prices. Because while Ukraine is famously the grain basket of Europe, last time I checked, not that many crops were grown in the middle of the desert. So then why is the Strait of Hormuz so essential for global food prices? In a nutshell, it's about 4 types of ships that are stuck in the Persian Gulf. The first are ships carrying oil. And these are going to farms all around the world. The second are ships carrying natural gas, mainly from Qatar. And then the third are ships carrying sulfur to, for example, fertilizer plants in Morocco. And finally, the fourth are those carrying about 1/3 of the global fertilizer supply. The way these 4 types of ships will affect your grocery prices are as follows. First, fuel costs are one of the main costs at mechanized farms, and of course they're also crucial in transporting your food to the supermarket. Second, at a high level there are essentially 3 types of fertilizers. There are nitrogen fertilizers, phosphate, and potash. And potash, well, that is largely unaffected. However, nitrogen fertilizers are made using natural gas. And nitrogen fertilizer plants in Europe and India rely heavily on cheap natural gas imports from the Gulf for their production. So right now they are facing higher production costs, which will translate, of course, into higher prices for these fertilizers for farmers, which will then ultimately translate into higher food prices. Third, to make all of that even worse, about 44% of world sulfur exports pass through the Strait of Hormuz, which is a major component needed to make phosphate fertilizers in places like especially Morocco. So again, they will face higher costs to make fertilizers, which will be translated into higher fertilizer prices for farmers all over the world. Finally, this region does not only provide inputs for fertilizer factories elsewhere. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Iran itself are also 3 of the top exporters of nitrogen-based fertilizers like urea, accounting for around 1/3 of global trade. So the blockade has basically removed around 20% of ready-to-use fertilizers from global markets. And then to make matters even worse, farming is an extremely competitive business. Farms have almost 0 profit margins, so higher fertilizer and higher energy prices at the same time, it immediately makes a lot of farms unprofitable, meaning that they will have to make difficult decisions. They can buy fertilizer at astronomical prices and try to pass the increased costs onto the consumer, or they can plant less and accept a smaller harvest that year. All roads lead to the same outcome, which is a higher grocery bill for all of us. So, food price inflation. When can we expect prices to start going up? Answering this question is very tricky indeed. You see, these three types of fertilizers are not all affected the same, but they are mostly used together at different stages of the crop growing process, and crop growing happens globally in different seasons. Therefore, instead of trying to model this ourselves, we have relied on food system experts like Raj Patel to give us an idea. And according to him, the current timing of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and different planting seasons all across the world actually creates a predictable timeline of food price inflation. If we look at grains and bread prices, for example, it's a matter of weeks. Then, if we look at products like egg and dairy, it's a matter of months. And finally, after about 5 months, we will start seeing the so-called protein spike, which means that pork and broiler chickens will become significantly more expensive because the corn and other feedstock prices will go up, and these are used to feed them. And so that will no longer be affordable. Yes, that sounds rather scary, but what does it mean for your grocery bill? Because you don't only buy these products. How much will food prices go up? Again, because of the complexity of global food supply chains, we have relied on expert predictions here, which can vary quite a bit and will, of course, depend heavily on two other things. Number one, where you are in the world. Some countries will be hit harder than others. And number two, how long the war will last. According to the UK's Institute of Grocery Distribution, if the disruption lasts a few months, food inflation would increase by roughly 1 percentage point due to the rising energy costs alone. But if it lasts longer and if oil prices go up by 150% and gas by 250%, food inflation purely due to energy could rise by about 2.5 percentage points in the UK. However, that is just energy, because in the UK, most farmers have already locked in fertilizer prices for the upcoming year. If you live in a country where they did not do that, then according to StoneX, fertilizer shocks could add up to 2 to 4 percentage points extra to food inflation. Now, notably, this does not take into account yet rising interest rates, which will also greatly affect farmers. That aside, on average, the crisis will likely lead, and this is still very uncertain, to a grocery bill that is about 3 to 6% higher by the end of the year. So what this means is that if your groceries were already expected to rise by 3% because there was already high food inflation, the war could push that increase much higher. Your total food bill could now go up by 6 to 9% instead. And such massive increases in just a year could especially happen if countries follow China in banning fertilizer exports to protect their own consumers. In that case, food prices may rise quite a lot more in certain countries. But of course, a lot of that will depend on the agricultural season and on how your government will react. They may decide to subsidize food prices. So, which countries are the most vulnerable? We don't know fully, but just to get an idea, according to the UN, some of the most vulnerable nations right now are those where the seasonal timing is very bad, like in particularly Sri Lanka, where the Maha rice harvest is underway. In Bangladesh, there will also be big problems because they have the critical Boro rice season. India also faces big problems because of reduced domestic fertilizer productions ahead of the Kharif season. Another set of countries that could be in serious trouble are those that rely heavily on food imports, where, for example, Egypt is famously very much reliant on wheat imports, and already also Sudan, which already has a massive food insecurity crisis. Other countries that are very vulnerable are fertilizer importers, such as, for example, the East African nations, and also, very crucially, Brazil, which has become one of the biggest food exporters in the world, but is highly reliant on fertilizer imports. And if prices in Brazil are driven up, then the cost of meat, grains, and basic staples everywhere will soon follow. So, in conclusion, to me, this fertilizer crisis really highlights that the global economy is facing a multi-crisis due to the US-Israel attack on Iran and consequent closure of the Strait of Hormuz. I've already talked about the direct energy market impact in another video. I've talked about the impact on Gulf economies in particular, and I'm planning to make another video soon to highlight the broader economic impact on emerging markets, because as we've seen in this video, they are especially vulnerable, and add to that they rely heavily on energy imports and also on Gulf money. Honestly, it's looking really bad for a lot of these countries. Now, if you have not seen my other videos yet, go check them out. And if there is another angle that I have not mentioned yet, like the airline crisis, Russia's perspective, Europe, the US, let me know what you want to see next in the comments below. And in the meantime, if you want to dig deeper, I highly recommend you check out the excellent analysis by our advertising sponsor, The Economist, which I always check out for the research process of my video. For example, their coverage of how the Russia-Ukraine war sent fertilizer prices soaring really helped me understand how quickly disruptions in one region can cascade through global supply chains. At the same time, they also dig into lesser known but fascinating dynamics like how Iranian firms have developed surprisingly creative ways to bypass sanctions, even in something as mundane as vegetable exports. And if you want a more direct look at what an Iran war could mean for energy markets and the wider economy, they've also got a podcast episode that breaks that down all clearly, that I will link in the comments. As these examples show, The Economist delivers insights that help you see the bigger picture and think for yourself. This is why I almost always rely on their analysis for my research, and it's why I highly recommend you subscribe. Indeed, I'm excited to say that they are offering a special 35% discount for Money and Macro viewers right now. Whether you prefer their daily journalism in the Economist app, or you're like me and enjoy catching up on the global economy over the weekend with a cup of coffee and the print edition, you'll always stay on top of the latest global developments and support journalism that values factual information, integrity, and an independent point of view. So don't miss out, click the link in the description or top comment below, or head over to economist.com/moneymacro to claim your exclusive 35% discount today.